Hello, folks. Welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. Tone down the music a little bit, just so a tiny bit in the background. Kind of like that. Okay, well, we're coming to you from a new venue today. We're in, well, not in, but close to the small mountain town of Salento in Colombia. Spending a month in mountain jungle paradise. A very nice Airbnb called La Posada del Cuckoo. I think it's the House of the Cuckoo. Maybe aptly named for its new resident. Well, today, I thought, given everything that's been going on in the past week or so, we might want to touch on one of the topics that probably will give the most pause to people as they consider what I've been telling them about the Omnist way of viewing things. And this is the subject of freedom. Now, if you've been following my other talks, you will remember that one of the core principles of Omnism is that free will is one of the gifts, one of the laws bestowed upon souls that is pretty much immutable. I don't know, there may have been a cycle or two in the Matrix where things didn't have free will, souls didn't have free will. I guess those didn't work out so well. Now some of you may say, well, I don't have free will. Somebody's always telling me what to do. And so this is one of the first topics we should probably touch on in our discussion of freedom. What is freedom? What is free will? Okay. So fundamentally, we have to drop back from there to acknowledging that there's sort of three types of freedom that one has, or one might have. Okay? There is freedom of thought, and I think, well, there maybe are people that say that, well, my thoughts aren't free because somebody's beaming waves in and controlling my thoughts or keeping me from thinking. I guess that is a way of interfering with thought, so that can be interfered with. But in general, thought is fairly free, and at least in this physical world, might seem to be fairly inexpensive. We'll touch more on that later. Second is freedom of speech. Putting what I think into what I say. That, again, can be impinged on by others. You can be punished for saying something in certain societies, in certain places, and you can be censured for saying what you believe. You can self-censor yourself, which basically is limiting your freedom of your own will, putting yourself in a prison of your own making to please others because you're afraid of others, etc. And then, of course, there is the freedom of action. Okay? And action probably carries more consequences, more potential problems than speech or thought. Now, those are interpretations in the physical world. In this physical realm where we believe that we see a door, if I open the door, I have acted upon the door. If I think I should open the door, nothing happens, right? Maybe, I don't know. Some people think better than others. Or I might say, open door. And if I had a certain amount of, spiritual power, that door might open. Okay? Now, in the spirit world, there are not these differentiations between degrees of freedom, because the spiritual world is a world of pure thought. And thought has immediate consequences to spiritual beings, assuming that they've advanced enough to have thoughts that have much power. Not all thoughts have power or equal power. But at any rate, the spiritual world is driven by thought. And that was a source of a lot of problems early on, before the physical part of the matrix was created, because those thoughts were instantaneous. They couldn't be taken back. You felt something bad about another soul, and even though you couldn't physically hurt them, you could very much hurt them in sort of a mental, psychological way. And those injuries, if you have much experience with relationships, can actually be as hurtful, as harmful as physical violence. Maybe sometimes more, because you feel hurt, but there's not really much you can do about it, and there's a tendency to feel like, well, it was just my feelings that were hurt. It's just me. It was, there's this complex reaction chain to something that somebody does to you mentally through thought. We can even do it to ourselves, and we do that a lot because we don't know what other people are thinking. We read between the lines and presume they're thinking one thing when they might be thinking something completely different, and you can have huge problems develop in a relationship just because thoughts aren't shared. Okay, so that is an aspect of our incarnation life that teaches us that thoughts can be dangerous, and our mental state can hurt us in ways that the outside world didn't have anything to do with causing. Now, this goes much deeper when you take into account the fact that you are the oversoul of a human body. So the thoughts you have can affect the other souls within your body, can turn them against you, can confuse them, can make them ill, can make them think that, I don't want to be part of this life anymore. I think I'm going to get a cancer and try to get this thing to die because I don't like it here. That can all be caused by thought. So, the human experience is a very good one for training people to start becoming aware of how their thoughts affect the world. In addition, we have this verbal expression. Now, we pretty much know that we can say something and hurt somebody's feelings, and as long as we're speaking the same language, and I guess something can get lost in the translation of how you said it, body language and so forth, and it could be misunderstood, but it's less likely to be misunderstood than just thinking something. And then, of course, if we fly off the handle and act on our impulses, our thoughts, that can have much bigger consequences. Now, I think if you stop and think about it, of the three, speaking, given what I just described, how thoughts bottled in can be misunderstood, can affect your body because you're suppressing your impulse to somehow act on a situation, for better or worse. I mean, generally when we take action, when we decide to say something, it's because we think that our agenda is going to be fulfilled to some extent. What we need, what we feel is justice, what is right, will be fulfilled by our words or deeds. That's why we say things. If we keep them bottled up inside, We may not hurt anybody's feelings that way, but we may hurt ourselves. We may confuse our mind that had a really good idea that got shut up by your oversoul brain and didn't get to express what it was feeling. Your heart didn't get to express what it was feeling, because the only way that all the organs of your body can express themselves is through the expressions that are pretty tightly controlled by the human. The mouth, the eyes, all our sensory organs are very good at what they do, but they don't really have much of a thinking life, if you will. They're observational and interactional. And the souls who inhabit them have a very different life than the souls that inhabit the organs that are more, not exactly advanced, but more, have a richer social life, let's put it that way. The heart, the brain, and of course the overall human oversoul are basically the three prime directors of the human experience in your body. There's other ones that have quite a bit of influence. The sexual organs certainly have a very big part to play, and to some extent one might say they think for themselves. The digestive system gets hungry and protests pretty loudly when it needs something. So it's not like the rest of the body doesn't have much to say. But I think you'll agree that the ones we talked about, the head, the mind, the heart, and the overmind, the mind of the soul, which exerts its influence over the whole body, have the most influence. So it's generally safe enough to talk about for most topics, to talk about the negotiation between those three. Anyway, so of the three ways of reacting to something, because there's so much potential for unintended consequences of thoughts that aren't acted upon, and so much potential for unintended consequences of thoughts that are overacted upon, i.e. the thought leads to an action, maybe a rash action like hitting somebody, shooting somebody, whatever, hiring somebody to hurt somebody. A lot of ways you can do some dark things when you take action. Of those poles, probably the healthiest one is spoken, the word, used rightly. So, the word can be used in anger, in thoughtless anger, and be very hurtful unnecessarily. On the other hand, sometimes a word spoken in anger can actually be a right action. A parent that never gets angry at a child may have a wonderful relationship with a child whose soul is very passive and accommodating, easygoing. They may never have to use anger in their voice. You've got only children like that, boy, you're going to have a relatively easy time as a parent. Most parents don't have all children like that. And if you've got a child that's prone to rebelliousness, that's prone to disrespect, that's prone to bend the rules at every turn, if you don't use a certain amount of strength, of power, of forcefulness in your interaction with that child, you're going to teach the child that they can get away with anything. And they will continue to observe those patterns that they learned from you, in the rest of their life. And they will have a fairly difficult time negotiating many of the places that one might find themselves in the modern world. Working in a corporation, participating in a class, etc. So, freedom is a complex beast. We don't have absolute freedom, probably in almost anything, because even our thoughts are not really as free as we might think, because our thoughts are an amalgam of inspiration and experience. If I am playing with a toy and I'm 2 years old and the toy is taken away by another child, I'm going to react in a very different way than a 4-year-old that gets the toy taken away. The 2-year-old will maybe start screaming, or maybe will grab the toy back and hit the other child. The 4-year-old may negotiate, saying, "That's my toy, can I have it back?" Or they might pick up another toy and say, "Can I have that one? Oh, you could play this one instead." Or the tricky ones will even pick up another toy and make it look like it's as much fun or more fun than the other toy, and then the one who took the toy will be attracted to that, will take the new toy, allowing the child to take back the old one. So, there's quite a bit of learning that happens that guides our thoughts and actions and words. And that's one of the reasons why every time we reincarnate, we have to start at ground zero. Because if we started from the point of all the knowledge we had in previous lives, we would miss relearning and learning in a different direction the lessons that we had in another life. If you spent one life growing up on the streets without strong parental guidance, without a lot of resources, you might learn to interact in a very different way than you would if you were born into a rich family with servants and people at your beck and call all the time. And, if that's what we learned, and we never learned any other aspects or any other ways of dealing with things, we would tend to have characteristics, some of which are negative, which any characteristic has its positive and negative. The child of the streets may be pretty resilient, may be able to handle themselves in strange and scary situations, maybe be able to fight off bullies, may be able to deal with a lot more hardship than one raised in the lap of luxury. On the other hand, they might have a very hard and harsh outlook on the world, might have difficulty expressing love, having healthy, nonviolent relationships with others. The rich kid, well, we can see the downsides of that. If everything is handed to you from cradle to grave, you don't really appreciate anything. You don't have a sense of having earned anything. There's a sense of entitlement that comes there. That, I've always got it this way, I've always gotten my way, so I always should. And there's less of an understanding of the need to compromise with others, the need to settle for what you can get. And, we see the consequences of that in the actions of the very rich. Some of them are just wonderful people, philanthropic, will do many good things for others without thinking of anything for themselves. But it's more common for that power to lead to a sense of entitlement, a sense of it's my right to lord over anybody else, and if they get in my way, well, that's not good because I always get my way. So there's poles of freedom there, and we need to learn them all in order to be able to deal with any situation that might come up upon us in the spiritual world. If we don't have the benefit of all that experience, as souls didn't before the physical world was created, they have a tendency to be like spoiled rich children. If you had unlimited power, you could make anything true that you thought, and at least to the extent that nobody else thought something different and sort of conflicted with your thought, which is a lot of, that's basically how conflict happens in the spiritual world. Our thoughts cancel out. I want this, that you want that, depending on who's got more energy, spiritual energy. One thought might win over the other, and one soul doesn't get their way, the other one does, or maybe they have a standoff, and you don't really learn too much from that when there's no real consequences. It's like, okay, we had different thoughts, we just cancel each other's energy. There's no real consequence to arguments in the spiritual world, and that's why souls need to incarnate, so that they can have the experience of their actions, thought, word, or deed, having consequences, and dealing with those consequences. And there's not always a right answer. We don't know very often what exactly is the right thing to do in a situation. We draw on our experience, our knowledge of the situation of the souls involved, and if we're wise, we take all those factors into account and make a decision what to do, what to think, what to say, how to act. And that conscious process of making decisions, of using our freedom consciously, is, and within the limitations of whatever environment that we find ourselves in, that is how the soul becomes more aware, more conscious, more able to act and to grow in ways that are healthy and productive. And as we discussed, that's basically the whole reason for being a soul, is to grow in productivity, whatever that means to the individual soul. Whether it means that you're going to be a soul that specializes in creating loving energies to inspire people, whether you're going to be a soul that specializes in creating challenging energies. I'm not going to say hateful energies. Hateful is a pole of negativity, right? And ultimately, even though souls may do negative things, when they become more advanced, when they become more conscious, more thoughtful, they do it for a very good reason. They've thought it out, and they've decided that this negative action is actually the one that is going to produce the best effect. And ask any parent who's had to deal with discipline issues in a child, and this is something that you've worked through. It's not easy, and it doesn't always work the way you thought it would. But by trying different things and by getting more familiar with your child, how they react to what you do, you can hone in on a better strategy. And that's something that applies to souls as well. That's something that God himself had to learn over many, many lifetimes of trial and error. As I've told you before, yes, gods and God, the first soul, do incarnate. They come down to this earth and they have the same kind of experience in whatever soul vessel they chose as any other soul. And what do they learn? What lessons do they get from that? Well, it's probably fairly different from most souls. They've experienced enough that they don't need to learn the really easy dark lessons or the really easy happy lessons. They tend to have lives that are subtle, that give them the experience of certain kind of inspiration they never had before. Maybe they've never been interested in music, been in a body that was sensitive to music or had a culture of music. And their first incarnation as a human might be, I'd really like to have the experience of being a composer and creating art with sound. They might have never had the experience of creating visual art, moving art, the art of writing. And that would be a novel experience for an old soul that, for instance, writing. If you'd only ever existed in forms that didn't need writing, it would be a pretty novel experience to go through a life where you made your living as a writer. And so this is how we hone in on passions. And even the elder gods have passions, and the passions change. Each passion rounds out another part of their experience. They may not choose to stay with that passion. Maybe they go through 3 or 4 lives where music is their focus. And after that point, okay, I get it. I understand the universe, the multiverse, from a musician or a composer's viewpoint. And it makes them more compassionate to those souls and gives them a chance to develop some deep relationships with musically inclined souls, which helps them be a better god for whatever specialty they have chosen in the spiritual world to work on. So that's how we use the freedoms to grow. Freedoms can be used darkly. Should they be punished when they're used darkly? Well, it depends. If you can sit back and see a soul that is unaware of the fact that it's living in a simulation and not going to actually be harmed by the pain and torture that another soul is dishing out to them, well, you could probably persuade yourself to let souls torture and maim and hurt each other. But I just don't think many souls worth their weight in soulfulness would make those choices. And there are some religions that take this idea of, well, since this is a simulated world, it's not really real, I'm not really going to die, that I can do anything I want. And that's one of the dark poles of those who take only a partial view of reincarnation, take only a partial view of what this physical matrix is all about. And so, those ideas are, and beliefs are things that, yes, as an Omnist, we try to understand, we try to appreciate, we try to tolerate, but, and this is a big but, and we talked about this in the introduction to Omnism, you can't just you don't need to just blindly accept other people's ideas if they become harmful. If you see that those ideas are hurting people, hurting souls, and causing them karma, emotional hurt that's going to have to be healed, of course you want to stop it. Do you want to punish it or just stop it? Well, I think generally you want to stop it. Then you come across the ethical decision of, is it more or less harmful to a wayward soul to put them in a jail for the rest of their life or to just end the life. And this is one of the areas where Omnism and the understanding of reincarnation might lead you to say, well, you know what? Given the number of offenses, given the psychological evaluation of this soul, if we can't find a way to keep them occupied productively in this life, I think we should just let them recycle. Not with malice, not with a sense of revenge, with the sense that, you know what? Whatever you chose to learn in this life, if you've gotten to the point where you're doing things like this, it may be time for you to go up to the heaven of a connection and plan another life, because I think you've learned enough of the dark lessons that you came here to learn. Now, does that mean that every proto-Hitler or proto-Stalin or proto-Mao should be stopped? No. If those souls had not done what they did, there were many consequences that happened for the human species that would not have happened. And some negative things need to happen to fulfill the overarching plan for a species, for a solar system, for the whole universe. If there was a way of getting to the point where the divine plan needed to be without it, it would happen, or will happen. And just because the current optimal timeline has a lot of negativity and violence does not necessarily mean that the next starting point of the prime universe might not have a better, a less violent, a less dystopian nature to it. That's all part of why we keep creating, why we keep coming up with new ideas, why we keep reincarnating. You can reincarnate in the future. You can reincarnate in the past. It'll often seem very linear to the soul because that's how we try to make sense of it when we're in a physical form. We don't see it as a bunch of lives lived across a bunch of timelines at a bunch of times in a bunch of timelines. But that's essentially what these multiple lives are when we reincarnate. When we remember them through hypnosis, through spiritual experience, through psychedelics, we try to assemble it into something that makes sense temporally. And sometimes lives are like that. I mean, if you've just graduated to incarnating as a human, you might choose lives that are sequential in nature because it just kind of makes sense to you. You want to kind of see this progress because you don't really quite grok what time is all about, what a timeline is all about, what a universe is all about, and you want to just limit your experience, and that's a perfectly good choice. Limit your experience to a linear set of lives in the same soul vessel for a while, so that you don't have to have, it's basically a very fundamental technique of a scientific experimentation, which, this is what this whole thing is all basically about, the experimentation of spiritual scientists. Every soul is a spiritual scientist at heart. And the scientist knows that if you want to conduct an experiment with a very specific goal, you try to reduce all of the variables down to just the ones that you want to have variable, so that you can separate out what is affected by the key variables and what is the consequence of a variable that you weren't tracking. Okay, so it's very, very common to want to have incarnations in sequential lives. And that's why many hypnotists who work to bring back past life memories will often report that their subjects had what seemed to be fairly linear lives with a lot of connections. And that certainly is the case for children that, through whatever vagary of chance, happen to remember something of a previous life. They tend to remember the most previous life, and there are scientists who study that, and that is where the body of knowledge comes from that pretty much leaves no doubt that reincarnation is a thing. I know there are many people that will shout and scream up and down that you're full of it. Reincarnation is not true. I'm sorry, it is true. You're going to have to reconcile that with your religious beliefs or your non-religious beliefs. It's a thing. Anyway, let's see. Did we cover everything I wanted to talk about today? Yeah, I think so. So I guess in general, this opportunity we have now where freedoms are being challenged as they never have before, where technology is automatically canceling freedoms, is automatically punishing our actions or our thoughts or our words. It's a challenge, and it's in a sense it's a good challenge because people are realizing just how much freedoms matter, and asking themselves these fundamental questions of how much freedom is worth how much pain, is worth how much conflict, how much anger. And I'm hoping that as we deal with this crisis of free will, that we will come up with two pieces of the answer. One piece, which is a core tenet of Omnism, is that freedom of expression is extremely important. And if we aren't allowed to express ourselves freely, it's not a good thing, because repression of speech creates disharmony. It creates conflict within. Unexpressed conflict can cause injury, can cause illness, both physical and mental illness, and it can increase the illness of a society. Because if nobody speaks out against something that is fundamentally wrong, that is harmful to everyone, that will allow it to get worse. Similarly, it's challenging us to reevaluate our ideas of the freedom of power and the fundamental issue of how do you make sure the powerful don't have more freedom than the powerless, or not maybe more, but don't have unreasonably more power, unreasonably more freedom than those who don't have power, because that leads naturally to dictatorship, authoritarian rule, nepotistic rule, passing down the power to your children, to your best buddies, and that's a very unhealthy thing that we know from our history time and time again is going to lead to worse and worse consequences the longer we don't deal with the concentration of power in the hands of a few, the more it is going to harm the many. Now, the alternative, you can't have all power within every individual. That would be chaos. So this dance between chaos and order, and trying to find this middle point, is actually another expression of the Trinity. This is this Trinity power, this power of three. The two forces of order and chaos pulling against the force of balance. When any of them gets out of whack, if you have too much order, you have too much control. You have too much power aligned with not changing. If you have too much chaos and no order, you have too much power in the hands of individuals who have no overall goal, no sense of cohesion, no idea of balance. That's also a negative pole. We have to look at history to see where societies have completely collapsed into chaos to see how dark an age that can be. On the other hand, if you go for the midpoint, you say, well, okay, we don't want order, we don't want chaos, we just want nothingness. We want nobody to think anything because thoughts are harmful. We want nobody to have an ego because egos are harmful. See where I'm going with this? Now that's a very dark pole too. That's a pole that basically it's a passive-aggressive use of abuse of freedom. It's saying that anybody who exercises their freedom in a way that this guru, this oneness religion, this magical, oh, we are all God. Therefore, I'm God, and I can tell you how ungodly you are because, oh, but you're God too. Well, you just don't quite understand it yet. You'll get it. This is kind of the neo-Buddhist approach to spirituality, and it's a dark thing. It's not a pole that is sustainable. It's a pole of self-deception and the deception of others. And I speak out against it. I get a lot of flack for it. I don't mind speaking out against it. That's why I enjoy free speech, and why I will keep speaking out against it. If you have arguments to change my mind, to convince me that I'm wrong about this pole, this middle pole, being no more healthy than gyrating all the way out to chaos or all the way back to order, I'm welcome to hear your thoughts. But I have a feeling that, like most of the folks I've encountered, you won't be able to justify that position very well, and you'll just, mostly they start calling me names and implying that I'm this or implying I'm that on the political spectrum, because that's the best way to conduct an ad hominem attack on somebody. But let me tell you, when you are talking with people about things like this, the Omnist thing to do is to thank them. Because in attacking you, they're not doing anything to you. If they attack you, it's because they have no argument to use to try to persuade you. So they want to depersonify you. That's their freedom. They can do that. Do you need to act on it? It's what you do with it. You have the freedom to do with it what you will. In general, my thinking is when somebody comes at me with an attack, it means that I've probably hit a very sensitive spot in their ideology. And, if you're very committed to a particular dogma and somebody hits a tender spot that you can't really justify, the natural inclination of a less developed soul is to attack, to make the person into the other, the enemy. So, that's their choice. I don't have to not express my opinion. At some point, I'll want to disengage with people like that because there's no arguing with a brick wall. Might be fun to torque them a little bit, and I have as much of a devilish streak as anybody in when I encounter somebody that is so dogmatically stuck in a rut. I'll mess with them a little bit. There's nothing wrong with that. Do I incur karma doing that? Well, maybe. Is it big karma compared to what I've had in all the lives that I've had? Nah, probably not much. And it actually might do some good, because these engagements between free thinkers and dogmatic thinkers are viewed by other people who might start listening to your ideas if they see that they are attacked without merit. Because attacking without merit says that you don't have any real argument against the other person. And that may convince some other souls to start looking more seriously at your beliefs. So, my recommendation is, in this time, freedom of speech is a good thing. If people attack you for it, if they try to shut you down, find some other way to express it. It's the healthiest thing for you, and ultimately it's the healthiest thing for the world around you. As long as you remain open to the idea that whatever you're saying, whatever your stance, could be wrong, could need some modification, could need some qualifications, some nuances that you haven't thought of. So just be open-minded, speak your speech, and accept that people will react to it. If they react with an attack, disregard the attack if it bothers you. If it has some merit, think about, well, why did that trigger me so much? Okay, we need to really think about, when we get triggered, what is the source of the trigger? Because that is where our dark places lie. So, anyway, I hope that helps you come up with some new ideas for dealing with this very fractious time we're living in. If you like this discussion, please subscribe, like, ask about how you can be part of the show. Donations are welcome. PayPal's your only option right now. Let me know if you want me to start a Patreon. I'll do that too. And until next time, I hope you enjoyed the Omnist Hour.